healthy grief. So we're going to start with, this is our intro, and then I'm going to go over a bit of a review of like the literature around grief. It's going to be very short, but it's going to give you a bit of a journey through. And then after that, we're going to talk about the event, the actual event that triggers the grief response, and how to set yourself up for either like best case, worst case for preparing for it. So almost like a proactive plan to be able to anticipate it's going to come, because I don't think any of us are going to dodge grief in our lives. That's not a option. So here it is. The idea is that you can actually gain some capacity before it strikes in your world. So we're going to talk about the event, and then we're going to talk about the target, healthy grief versus like complicated, chronic or delayed grief. They're going to shift to like how leaders compare themselves to help leaders or peers to help people that are going through like a grief episode. Then we're going to expand it out and talk a bit more about collective grief, meaning that we can have individual grief, but a district or a forest or a hotshot crew can have a grief event and walk through it together, and how that is just an interesting thing to think about. And then at the end, we're going to talk about, again, a leader or peers, so their role, and there's sort of like phases or stages of walking with people that are going through grief. So that's going to be our 90 minutes. Let's see how we go. So are you ready? Okay. So here we go. The history of grief. So I don't think anyone can have a proper conversation about grief without starting sort of with the grandmother of all grief in a theoretical point of view. Her name was Elizabeth Kubler Ross. So she's a Swiss psychologist, and she was just looking at her world that she was in and saying, man, we have not humanized this thing. Like there's just something wrong. So she just started exploring. Now to caveat, her research was based at first on people that get the bad news that they're going to die, and then the process that they go through to accept the fact that they're going to die, and then how that goes through. And she saw a pattern, and a lot of you are going to be familiar with this. And there is a lot of like therapists like myself, like I was a therapist for 21 years that ran a private practice, and this was kind of our meat and potatoes for grief. It was it was kind of unchallenged. And so basically she said that there was 5 stages that people go through when they get the hard news that, hey, you've got something really bad and you're going to die. Now, what's happened in the therapeutic world is we've gone, oh, that's an interesting idea. I wonder if it also works here and here and here and here. So her model has been applied in many, many different places. So that's kind of the caveats. And it still holds water, but there has been more layers of really great thinkers and researchers on top of Kubler Ross's work. So let's start with the foundation, then we're going to add some on top of it. So Kubler Ross, does anybody just have those 5 stages in their brain? So stage 1 is denial. Oh yeah, there's the acronym. I see it on the chat. So denial, and then anger, then bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And from there, I have over the years, because I mean, when you're a family therapist, I mean, grief is one of the things that you bump into all over and over and over again. I started drawing it as if it was a bell curve. So you're going along, life is good, something happens, and then there's a bell curve that comes around. And then for me, just because I'm a visual guy, I kind of said, oh, okay, so there's these stages. So now if I draw them out, I'd say, okay, so now we start with denial, and then what's the next one? Bargaining, and anger, and then like depression, and then acceptance. And I saw it as kind of like this kind of a journey. Now, the truth is that it is kind of like that, but it isn't necessarily linear, because there can be like micro moments and people flashing in and out. So this model, even though it looks beautiful as a bell curve, is actually very messy. And then when we get to healthy grief later in our talk, we're going to talk about how Kubler-Ross's model was a good sort of foundation piece, and then how people deviate from this. Okay, so then about 20 years ago, out of Columbia University, a man called George Bonanno showed up in the scenes of grief, and he said, you know what, Kubler Ross is kind of like Switchback. It's kind of anecdotal. It's kind of, did she just make this up? Like, is there research and evidence, connected to what's going on? So he went all researchy on the world of grief, and he researched, like, this was his thing. He just researched, and he came up with what he calls psychological resilience, which he said, like, Kubler Ross's model is nice and it makes it's a good sense, and I honor her, but not everybody goes in this bell curve. In fact, some people use humor to heal. And like the whole world's like, "What? You're not allowed to be funny during grief, don't you know? You have to be sad and hold hands." And he goes, "No, it's interesting." And so he came up with a coin that made him a little bit famous. He called it coping ugly. You might want to write that down because it's kind of a neat idea. So good old George came up with this idea called coping ugly. And what he means by that is grief takes many forms. So he took the pattern that us clinicians had sort of created and saying, well, are you what stage of grief are you at? And he actually even challenged and said, I wonder if the clinicians are creating the problem as much as the solution. Because we would say as clinicians, like, well, it takes 2 to 3 years to grieve, and you have to get through the bell curve. And, it sounds like you've kind of skipped through the denial phase or stage, so you better go back there, or anger, or this. And so, how those of us that are even peer supporters can actually prescribe pain onto people's lives that maybe it doesn't even exist. So then we have someone like myself I'm generally good-natured, and I will joke probably before I cry. It's when I'm nervous, I laugh. And then, so for me, the Kubler Ross model I didn't fit her model. So when, like, George's model actually makes a ton of sense. So he says, coping ugly, grief takes lots of forms. And then he proved it through research and really evidence-based models. So thank you, George. Okay, and then we move into another phase, which is almost like the biological neuroscientists have now taken a swing at grief. And they're like, okay, so we understand crying, but what actually happens with tears? And is there a chemical difference between happy tears, sad tears because you got a bug in your eye? And they're all like, they're just nerding out, and I absolutely love it. I love it. It's so interesting. And one of the people and sort of leaders in the research in this world is a person called Mary Frances O'Connor out of the University of Arizona. So she basically says, grief is going to come on every one of us regardless, but there is something that we can do to prepare from a resilience point of view, to prepare before it hits us, and to a way for us to walk through it that has a biological neuroscience flavor to it. And surprise, surprise, she talks about the foundation being sleep. And then the next is adjusting your circadian rhythm and practicing exercising something called, looking after your vagus nerve. What I mean by that is that she said, like, someone could be having, like, what we would in the therapeutic world would say, oh man, they're just falling apart, and they're snotty-nosed, and they're having all this anxiety and a mild panic attack. She'd go, sure, I understand, but do you know if they would just speed up their heart rate when they inhale and slow their heart rate down when they exhale, and they would practice that on a daily basis, you know what? You're giving your brain the opportunity to have neuroplasticity and heal from the trauma of the grief. Now, one of the people that I love to follow, who talks about this as well, he's got a great YouTube channel. His name is Andrew Huberman, a podcast. So good old Andrew, he's great. He wears a black shirt, he's black background, he looks almost like a biker, but he's like a neuroscientist. So it's a very interesting, as long podcast. So you have to really commit. It's like 2 hours long, most of them. So he talked about, when he talks about grief, he says, the real issue is, he doesn't use the word homeostasis, that comes out of my world, but he says the real issue is that the homeostasis or the pattern in someone's life, grief is the car crash of that pattern. And the healing or the rewiring, they wouldn't use the word healing, they'd use the word the rewiring of your neurological pathways is a readjustment of a new homeostasis pathway. And I'm not going to get all geeky here, but just to whet your appetite, he talks about when you have a connection with somebody, what you have is these stored memories around space and time. So time is that you literally have spent time with them, and space is you know where they are. Like, for instance, my wife, she sleeps in the same bed with me. I know, like, if I can't find her, I know guaranteed she's in the garden. And I'll stand at the top of our front of our property and go woohoo, and then I hear and right away my brain goes through. Oh, everything is in homeostasis. The pattern is understandable. I've got decades of experience of knowing time and space with her, and as a result, a powerful connection. If she were, for some reason, all of a sudden to be gone, my brain would go, and I would anticipate and expect to hear something coming out of the garden, hiding behind the sunflowers. And then I'd expect to see a ponytail, but then with grief, it doesn't happen. So Andrew and his neuroscience friends say that is the core issue, is that you have an expectation that this person has been predictable in your life. You have all these stored memories, and now it's not. Or the thing, let's say your house burns down, or you get fired and they say you can take, clean out your stuff, you get 2 boxes, and out you go. So you have, there's our stability and resilience is based on the predictability of patterns. And when those patterns are disrupted, the neuroscientists call that grief. So this is just a little like window into this whole world. I love it all. My background is family systems theory. And so we would say grief is also connected to the interconnections of family and relationship and traditions and patterns and all that. So there's our history lesson. Now let's talk about the event. And the cool thing is we can now reference a little bit about what we've been talking about here. Event. Well, I'm not in love with this black. Let's see if I got another one. Okay, so here's the grief event. Let's say best case scenario in Switchback, we have something of the model that we call the brain framework. We say this baseline here is your prefrontal cortex, and it's where you do some of your best work. And this target is the best place to be within your prefrontal cortex, which is what we call the front brain. And then we draw it out just dramatically. We say, okay, there's 2 mountains, and they represent the flight, fight, freeze response. And this is just a brief review, but it's really an awesome way to think about things. Here's the flight mountainside. Here's the freeze. And then with red, I'll go lava mountain, and here's the fight. The very interesting thing is a lot of grief research and literature actually doesn't directly reference mountains and this model, but it's nuanced and very, very close. Okay, so here's the grief event. We're going to represent the grief event as an X. So in Switchback, we call it a memory X, but here's the X. So let's pick our poison. Here it is. There's the X. So the X is either a human loss of a connection, let's say, with a pet, a loss of a thing like a house or a job, or even sometimes, like, you can even go through grief where you have something nostalgic. Like, I'll give you, it just pops in my mind. My dad has a skinning knife, in a black, little case, and he used it for whittling. if I were to be fortunate enough to get that knife, when it's time to hand out his treasures, it's kind of like the gold watch, little watch that doesn't work anymore in the drawer. If I get that knife, and then I would lose it on a camping trip, it would bug me. It has no material value, but it has nostalgic value. And from a neuroscience point of view, it has a lot of memory stored in that black knife. Lots of memories. Like all the way through my childhood, every camping trip, every hiking trip, you'd always have it on his belt. And so it's just a thing, but it would take the work of processing grief in order to sort it out. So this event can be like the loss of a person or an animal or a pet or a thing, like a property loss or a job, or even something as simple as a knife that has no material value. So it happens, boom. Now, best case scenario is that you have established your primary coping strategies and primary functioning somewhere in this red circle that we call team and success. And what I mean by that is you've established kind of like your true north. We sometimes call it like an anchor bolt. And you have an anchor bolt that's anchored in like a rock climber. It's anchored in here. And so you know where to go when you hit hard times. You go, okay, I'm hitting hard times. I need to work myself, hold on to the reality of not too hot, not too cold, rational, connected to team. That's best case scenario. When we look at that, it's sort of people that have that as their bread and butter, their daily operating model, and they have a community of people that share that same core value that says we like to be rational and funny and creative, but we know how to anchor ourselves back into a predictable place, and it's in this red circle. Oh, by the way, here we'd say this is being a little bit too passive, and on this side being a little bit too aggressive. So best case scenario, when you get hit with the event that triggers grief, you will end up doing pow, pow, pow like this. And it'll disrupt you. It'll disrupt your sleep patterns and your eating patterns, and you'll lose your appetite. And you'll feel like you're in a brain fog. Wait a second. You'll feel like you're in a brain fog. Freeze. You'll feel like running away. Flight. You'll be angry at the world. Fight. Ooh, what is that? Kubler Ross, remember? One of her stages was fight. One of them was denial, which is freeze. One of them is bargaining, which is, I'm not even sure where bargaining is, because it's more of a cognitive process. And then she has like that, I always do a little loop on the bottom of my Kubler Ross, like bell curve, little loop, and I call that the dark night of the soul. It's like just before the dawn is this dark night of the soul where it's like, is it even worth carrying on? Like, why, is there anything to live for moving forward? And it's that deep despair. And from that comes the early light of dawn. I see it sort of as a metaphor of nighttime and then daytime. And then up it comes. So there's that horrible moment where you're way up here and you're in the, what I call the dark night of soul. And this is where people even contemplate things like suicide or giving up or running away. And then dawn comes. And if you're thinking about the dawn, this is going to be where hope and resilience has its foundation. And the dawn will then draw you down the mountain back down here. So, best case scenario, if you have practiced this as a habit with yourselves and your inner circle and the people you work with and your peer supporters, then this anchor, you have what's called muscle memory to find your way back from an episode of grief. And you have less likelihood of grief becoming chronic, which means never ending, or unresolved or delayed. Now, that's the good news. Now let's talk about how we actually live our lives. So me along with the rest of you, it's an ideal to live in red circle, But if you've got a job, let's say in wildland fire, this red circle is not even presented to you as the possibility. You're offered this circle here, which is, we'd like you to be a rock star, which means you better like head down, dig line, and get some work done. And you can live without sleep, and we can disrupt your patterns, and you can do 12, 14 days in a row, no problem. You can sleep in a tent, and even the nutrition can be kind of odd, but giver, it's awesome. And so you end up like living, let's say, a fire assignment culture in wildland fire. You're kind of living here. It's an adrenaline run for your money. So wonderful. You feel alive. The rest of the world, as civilians, are like, you guys are so boring. So like, what do you mean you read a book in the evening? Like, what do you mean you're in the garden, like weeding around your banana plant? Not banana plant, like I do have a banana plant, but it's in a solarium. But anyways, side note. But I like what are you doing these silly things like weeding your garden? Don't you know the world's on fire? So don't you know the world's on fire? So when grief hits the hypervigilance brain of, let's say, a wildfire member, they're not in best case scenario. They're in kind of worst case scenario because they're already using back brain pathways as a coping method to survive. They're already in a survival mode. It feels like the hero's journey. It's like, no, this is just Rambo. We love it. Like that was a close call. We almost died. Awesome. And so they're already in that world where they're not necessarily anchored here, and you're getting a lot of adrenaline juice from here, and your cortisol is going to be all wacky. It's not going to be nice circadian rhythm of, a bit of a cortisol spike in the morning, and then it dips down, and by 4:00 there's less, and by 9:00 at night it's really slow, and you're putting all your devices away and just reading a book, and then at 10:30 you tuck yourself in, it's all dark and there's no phones or computers in your room, have this nice sleep, and then at 4 in the morning you hit your lowest temperature, which sets your circadian rhythm for the next day, and then you wake up and you get sunlight on your face and you're like, what a life I'm living. That's that right there. That's not wildland fire or lots of other jobs, or those that work shift work. Half my children are either emerge doctors or emerge nurses, and we've had these long conversations preparing for this, going like, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to process this? Because your circadian rhythm is just like all over the place. So the neuroscience people have some suggestions, but worst case scenario is this is kind of your go-to preferred neurological pathway. When grief hits, you're like, oh, just another Tuesday. But the ability to process it is severely disabled because you're operating in the flight, fight, hypervigilance part of your brain. And so the task of actually processing and walking through a grief episode is going to be extremely challenging. Well, I would definitely geek out by going straight towards Andrew Huberman to start with, because he even talks about people that work shift work, like law enforcement, and he talks about how their circadian rhythms, or people that do a lot of international travel, and how like time zones can really mess people up, but there is a best case way to sort of manage it. So my guess is your cortisol spiking pattern, which is the healthy version, which is a spike, around 10 o'clock in the morning, and then it comes down. My guess it's out of kilter. This is just me talking about somebody else's like research, right? Yeah. I would be fascinated with that, but I think the career itself jazzes up your brain too, because law enforcement's like, especially your law enforcement within Forest Service and stuff, that's really fun. So let's go visit somebody all by ourselves at 9:30 at night, and now you're at the drunken hunting camp and they've poached an elk, and that doesn't sound like fun.
It is
No
though.
matter how you look at it, it's like there is no good answer to this. And so your body and your brain is like, I know I'm getting paid and I know this is my choice of career, but I could die, so I better pay attention. So either you're going to go flight, hide in the cave, like this is the dark night of my soul, or you're going to get all puffed up like a puffer fish and get all like hyper vigilant, ego-y, like, I'm going to lay down the law and write a bunch of orders, or you're going to be like me and just joke around with them and then capitulate and not actually follow the boundaries, right? That like there's a thousand ways to respond that's not anchored. So I would think that this little piece of the framework that we're talking about is probably your lifesaver from a career point of view. Is you and your colleagues ask yourself the question, what does it mean for us to be anchored in the front of our brains? And then I mean, I just like, for instance, today I didn't want to fall off the rails, so I've been preparing for a couple of days with my sleep, and I have other things I'm doing, but this is an event for me. So this morning I set my alarm at 7. I was really careful the night before. I got up, I sat in this, the sun was cloudy, but I got my face into the sunshine, which anchors again, right? And then I went for a short run, and then I've got a pond, so I went for a short swim. And then I had 3 eggs and some water with apple cider vinegar. And here I am. And that's my best attempt not to capitulate or get angry or hide in the cave of despair. Yeah, I would definitely look at the circadian rhythms and say, what, under the circumstances that I'm in, how can I calm things down and create homeostasis here? Because homeostasis is here as well. Am I making any sense? People can be in a pattern of like when we hang out and do training, let's say with hotshot crews, they hate us. Because like, what do you mean being a hero is not cool? Like long term. Like, what do you mean totally neglecting my family for 5 months isn't acceptable? Like, what are you talking about? Don't you know we're saving the world and we got this huge bond on and none of us are married anymore. But that doesn't really matter because we're 40-year-olds and we're just not growing up emotionally. No way to say that out loud, but like there's this thing that goes on that's normalized within that 1 second. And of course, all the people that are hotshot guys like, okay, Steve, I'm getting on the mic right now. I'm not making fun. I'm deeply passionate about like wildland fire because we normalize the frog in the pot. And then we wonder why we're having a hard time managing our money at 45, managing relationships, dealing with grief. We wonder why we are attracted to things that are addictive in nature. Well, you know what? From a neuroscience point of view, it's predictable. And so if it's predictable, it's preventable. Law enforcement is even worse because you wear a serious uniform and your trucks are so tricked out. It's like, whoo, I get sweaty just standing around you guys. So I lose my anchor and I come out here. I actually have to talk myself down when like we've done training for SWAT teams and stuff like that. And I need to go for long runs before I train with them because I'll get all hyper because I can feel that normalized rock star mindset. So I'm just saying, let's conclude. The rock star mindset is to your disadvantage if you're trying to process grief in a healthy way. It's not your friend, it's your foe. That's the serious piece about this. Okay, well, on that happy note, let's now shift. I'm going to go back to that bell curve because I think it's really interesting. So now we're going to look at it again. I'm going to go back to grief, and now we're going to talk about healthy grief. So I'm going to use this. I use that model with the bell curve just to be able to help us visualize. Of course, it's more complex than this. Of course, like George Bonanno says, hey, come on, there's coping ugly. There's so many different ways that we can do this, and resilience has a different look. I understand. But this is a way for us to at least share a conversation. Okay, I'm going to draw this way. So I'm going to do it sort of in 3 different phases. So here's healthy grief. You're living along. Something bad happens. There's the X. You go through the bell curve, come out the other side. They would say 2 to 3 years for a major event, like a death of a spouse or a child or a parent, an unexpected death, fatality in the forest, 2 to 3 years. Now, again, some people say no, actually 1 year or 3 or 4, but that's not the point. Is that we've got ourselves a base. In here, of course, we can now add, if we want to add Kubler Rosses, we can say, okay, there's stages. Here's that dark night of the soul that I talked about. And then this is when you start coming up into acceptance, and there it is. So let's say that's healthy grief. And I think that even the neuroscience people would say, yeah, we can live with this. Okay, now let's talk about complicated grief. So complicated grief is basically in 2 categories. One is delayed, and the other is chronic. So I'll do the chronic one first. So here's same event. You hit the grief. It happens. You go down. That's chronic grief. You don't see any vagus nerve breathing exercises. You don't see people trying to get their circadian rhythms right. You don't see people going to grief sessions with their friends or their peers or support group or sorting things out. It's bad, and you don't recover. Eventually this will have another diagnosis attached to it. So whether it's an anxiety disorder or they'll label it as depression, or something will take place there. So that's complicated grief. That's chronic. And then there's a model that I've seen a lot in the forest industry. Everybody has a job to do. For whatever reason, one of my jobs over my entire career has been, when there's a fatality in the forest, I typically get a call on Vancouver Island, especially on northern Vancouver Island. And the call is like, hey Steve, can you come? And I always say yes, and you just reschedule your life and you go. So the goal is to create somewhat of an anchor for people and for the situation. And what's been helpful in the forestry world to visualize this is to talk about what's called delayed grief. So delayed grief looks like this. Something happens, the event, and a group of people go down and go through this bell curve, let's say. And it might be shallower, it might be deeper, it might be more steep. But then there's a number of us, me included, because I have a professional designation in the world of caring for people. We do this. We just call it the red line. We red line it, which means it's not my job to experience grief. It's my job to help process the grief for others. It's my job to be a listening ear. It's my job to get in a helicopter and fly to the scene and talk to, people and just stand there. It's my job to attend the funeral and sit in the second row and hug people. It's my job to my job to pay my mortgage next month. My job to next week start having appointments again. It's my job to go to my kid's hockey game and coach it. And so your brain just says, it's my job as a leader or a peer supporter to be the support, not the griever, which makes kind of rational sense. And if there is something that needs to be processed, I can delay it. I can just delay it. So this red line is a delayed grief. Now, some people don't actually believe that's a thing. They say tomato, tomato, I say, for our conversation. So it's a delayed grief. This happens to tons of people. And it's happening more and more. My anecdotal look at the world is that we're all kind of running hot, and our capacities either, we feel we have this belief system that we're at max in our, let's say, our carrying capacity, and also with our devices and doom scrolling. When we do have capacity to, let's say, recharge our batteries, we're doing things that are detrimental to our brains functioning to be able to have capacity to grieve with those who grieve. And so we've created, I think, a collective. This is just me thinking and watching the world that we're part of. We've created a collective limiting belief that says, I don't know that I've got capacity to, I can help, I can do logistics, but I can't grieve with you. What happens if we just now roll this back into, let's say, the research that I tracked back in the day was around Sid's death, which is just one of the most tragic things. You have this beautiful baby, you're so excited, you're fatigued, you're vulnerable because you're a parent, you don't know what you're doing, so you try your best to keep this baby alive, and you're doing it perfect, and then one morning you wake up and your baby's not alive. It's like shocking. And so the amount of complicated emotional, spiritual processing that goes on is just it's profound. So what the researchers noted was that typically good old mom goes into the grief bell curve, and good old dad redlines, because he goes, someone's got to pay the bills, and even though probably they're still both working, right? But someone's got to, in theory, pay the bills and keep the lights on and make food and clean things and take the garbage out. So that'll be me. I'll just man up and look after my family while my wife falls apart. So she goes and gets help and goes to a Kubler Ross, support group meeting, and they walk through the stages of like denial and bargaining and anger and the dark night of the soul. And in about 18 months or so, she starts coming out, and she's doing okay. So she's coming out here. She's starting to see the light. There's hope. Now you have to do what's called integrative learning right now, which is I'm telling a story about a Sid's death, but integrated into your own experience of grief, whether it's the loss of a pocket knife to the loss of your own loss, or a job, or like your own person, or that you've lost. So try to integrate it into the story. So she's coming out here, let's say about 18 months. His brain will pick that nuance up and go, she's gonna live. She's gonna survive. She's gonna make it. There's hope. There is a dawn coming. And then his brain will say, I guess it's my turn. And then he will go down here into his bell curve grief cycle, but it's complicated because it's delayed and it's not connected to this event anymore. And so what it'll look like the literature says, it'll look like an affair. It'll look like quitting his job. It'll look like taking up a habit of gambling. It'll look like reckless activity. And everyone's like, what an animal. Like, not only did he lose a child 18 months ago, now he's gone off and had an affair, blew up his marriage. Like, we're like, what a beast. He's not even human. Like, where's his heart? Where's his soul? And you'll get all this judgment. And so if it's predictable, it's preventable. So the predictable piece here, from my thinking as a clinician, is that I think he misplayed it. I think it would have been better for him to go down this with his partner and just live out the consequences of that. So they both have to take time off. So they have to phone their parents and say, hey, can you spot us 10 grand because we've got 2 mortgage payments that we need to make. And would any parent, grandparent be willing to spot their kid 10 grand, their adult kid? Yeah. And if they wouldn't, Uncle Jimmy would, somebody would. And so the power of team, we say. And for sure, it'd be messy and be snotty, and it'd be like your friends would say, just come here and play hockey with us. Don't talk about it. Like there would be all this chatter around it. But what do you think about going down like this together? And so in forestry on Vancouver Island, when I get to process with a small community and all the phases of a logging company and the leaders and the mayor and the city and the little village police, and this, we talk about this. We say, everybody, let's jump in this thing together, and let's watch out for the red line in each other's lives. Let's watch out for it. And if there is some redlining, we just lovingly say, how are you doing? Come join us. Come join us. This is shitty. Come be part of this shitty thing. Because there's no real way for it not to be shitty. And that speaks profoundly to industry, families, and folks. And because there's another piece that connects to this complicated grief, where this one is chronic. This is delayed. With both of these, you end up with what safety people call an incident within an incident. Or what's another term for it? I've got notes. Oh yeah, collateral damage. Wasn't that profound? Collateral damage. An incident with an incident, or collateral damage, meaning that it's bad enough that, let's say, there was a fatality in the workplace. That's bad enough. But then for people to jump out of their careers and blow up their own personal lives and go into reckless spending of money and smash up their family, for people to do that on top of this thing that's going on here, that's like the incident within an incident. And so I have exact examples where we say, okay, this has just happened. You got a crew of 80. Let's just, some of you are going to be you're sort of like tier 3. You're not that connected. It's fine, but just lock arms and let's do this thing together. Let's go into these deep waters and we'll come out the other side. And let's not smash up your career and your family and your finances and get messed up in addictions. Let's minimize the collateral damage. And when that happens, collectively, a small village / logging camp can walk through what we call healthy grief. And the weird thing is, it's profoundly elegant. And if you could even say beautiful, and it changes people's lives for the better because it builds team and it creates a situational awareness of each other. It is the ultimate peer support vibe. Let's just pause for a second. Any thoughts or anything that somebody wants to talk about this?
So I do, and thanks for the pause, because I'm trying to formulate the question. I'm looking at the red line, the delayed grief piece, and I'm just thinking about, you mentioned that folks who are I think you called it tier 3, right? They're affected, but they're not on their own. They wouldn't necessarily go into that deep of a grief bell curve, right? There's an impact, but it's not the same. I'm wondering, and struggling for how to put this. I think we have this idea in our head. I do. That being on the red line is helping that person.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if actually getting off the red line and spending that time kind of going into the grief curve with them helps that person who's on your blue line there. If that's more of a help than it is to keep the wheels in the bus.
Yeah. So I remember I have an example. So there's one really muscle-bound logging manager, really great guy, but he's very, very driven, like what people would say type A personality. And he had a fatality in his forest, and I'm his wingman now. Unfortunately, probably hating it, but the VP said, hey, you and Steve are running together now. And so he had to do these town hall meetings. And he was terrified of it, because if I go to this guy over here, he was rock starring in his own life. So he was pretty much shut down, let's say emotionally, and really focused on just results, results, results. But you could see he was like bound, like this. When he would get upset, they would just pound. You could had all these tells. So him and I were talking before he has to stand in front of like about 75 people and do his town hall meeting and process this. He said, Steve, I'm shitting myself because I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it through. I said, I hope you don't make it through. He goes, what are you talking about? You're insane. I said, no, I don't want you to make it through. You're tough. You're resilient. You're a great leader. People follow you, but they need to see a level of humanity right now that increases your leadership capacity. So I'm hoping that you actually choke up. I'm hoping that you have to turn away from the mic. I'm hoping that you have to blow your nose and then take some, combat breaths. Get back on your horse and keep delivering your message. If you don't do that 2 or 3 times, you've robbed your logging camp from true, pure leadership. He's like, oh, I hate you so much. And I go, I know. You'll get back to homeostasis eventually, but this is the current homeostasis. The homeostasis is that we're here, and that's the way you're going to love everybody, is if you show that. And so he did. So he stood in front and said, okay, so welcome. Glad you're here. This is not actually a safety meeting. We're going to be talking about the incident, blah, blah, blah. And then when he said the guy's name, it triggered the X. And he paused, got a big lump in his throat, just about ripped the pockets out of his jeans because he had the old muscle bound. And the whole room's just leaning in. You go, that's our leader. And because we validated it and we said, no, this is actually your job, is to show that humanity in this moment. It was, I think it was life-changing for him as well. So tier 3, let's say a senior manager, this will look different than someone that's tier 1, that's right in the heat of the moment. Because we will have capacity to just carry on with the anchor. We can stay anchored. But I know it's just a visual, but I just encourage everybody just to think about this as a tool in your toolbox to say, is it better for me and the people that I look after and the people that I support and the people that I love, for me to be able to open up that doorway and go into this and then come back out again? And theoretically, I would say, yes, please. I'm telling you, it's not easy for me either, because my default is humor and distraction. I am a rodeo clown by nature. Oh, it's getting tense. Everybody look over here. I'm that guy. And so for me to be the one that actually sits with somebody's pain and then actually not just sits, but actually viscerally, where I actually feel it, that's a learned behavior, not what I would call a natural result. Somebody want to add? Yes.
Are you done with that?
Yes.
Dave, I don't want to jump in on top of you.
I think he says yes.
Okay. What about distraction? And do you think that, like, when you're going through grief and you're just distracting yourself, is that another way of doing the red line? There's just times when you just go, okay, I'm just going to turn on a silly movie, or just like tune out completely just to distract.
Yes and no. I think back to like George Bonanno, right? Grief takes many forms. So if I just go into my own personal experience, like phase 1 for me as a leader, when I go into a fatality situation, I get driven air flown in, I land, bloop, and there's this stuff going on. I visualize myself as a guardian angel. I have really nothing to do other than stand guard. And I stand guard for the whole situation. I try to reduce, because sometimes there'll be a suicide 24 hours after a fatality. And I just know that that's a possibility. So I have that visually in my mind going, my job is to reduce the potential of somebody having a car crash 24 hours from now. So I just stand there and say, everybody, there is an anchor to this world. You can be anchored. And Iron Knight right now represent that anchor in a positive sense. But meanwhile, back like a week later, when I'm visiting the family, they will have the hunting channel on their TV nonstop in the living room. And we will sit and look at the hunting channel, which is a distraction. And that is a perfectly awesome, beautiful thing to do, because in Switchback, we talk about people's capacity to be in what we call lane 3, which is that profound sadness or the profound grief. And we say that people can live there for maybe 11 minutes before they need to take a breath. And so the distraction of a funny movie or laughing or watching the hunting channel, that is super functional in that setting, because it gives the ability, because it's horrible when there's a fatality in your family, because all these people come marching into your home with casseroles and things, and they don't know what to say. And the minute they see you, they're triggered by their own X that they haven't processed. Instead of helping you, they dump their load on you. So that's the other reason I'm sitting there, because I'm there to be like a bodyguard for the grieving family. Because all these people, I'm telling you, you could put money on it. They come in, they're well-intentioned. They want to sit, they sit down, they grab a donut from the kitchen, they sit down in the living room watching the hunting channel, and then they're waiting, and now that moment happens where they either when they stand up, like one of those transitions where they have to face the grief of that person. They'll go, "This is terrible," and then they'll go, 10 years ago, and they start telling their story and going, no, because we're a society of sort of like unprocessed grief, or grief that just keeps on popping up, right? It sort of just stirs it up. Yeah, so I think distraction is there's a healthy version and an unhealthy. There's a functional and there's a dysfunctional. I think 3 years later, if you're still redlining with distraction, it's probably not a good thing. But in the heat of the moment, when it's so intense, if you'd stay in the intensity, you'd end up with a migraine and an ulcer, and you'd be throwing up and you wouldn't be able to eat. This is one of my weird world that I live in is when I'm responding to a fatality in industry, I never pack a lunch. So the way I bond with people is I eat their food. So I'll come in and I'll watch the hunting channel for a bit and go, "Oh man, I'm famished. Any chance I can go in your fridge?" You go, "Oh yeah, eat, man. We have way too much food." I'll go in their fridge, I'll grab food and I'll microwave it, and I'll just make myself at home. By the time I've had one meal, I'm inner circle. I'm tier 1. Like I'm the official guardian angel for the family. And I can be wearing a an office shirt. Like I don't need to wear like logger clothes to fit in. It's eating their food. And so I'm using it not as a distraction, just as a normalization. So there are ways for us to love people that's actually a tactical strategy. So I would suggest eat people's food, get in their world and just be there. Plus the food's usually pretty delicious as well. And you're modeling good behavior because they're not eating. So somebody at least is eating in the home, right? This is nice. I think let's try continuing. Okay. So I'll move this guy off. Put him on top of this here. So let's now talk about how leaders can prepare to be able to operate. And I think I'm just going to briefly focus on this, is that I think if we as leaders realize there is a way for us to get an anchor bolt into our lives, and then harness up and where we have what's called self-regulation, where we learn how much belay rope we're going to give ourselves, so that when we have a big event, we go up, we experience the event, but we still have a harness on, and we still have belay rope, like we're tethered, just like a roofer would be tethered to their top of the roof. We're tethered, and so that we know we can find our way home. It's like in the prairies, the prairie farmers, can you believe this? They used to tie a rope between their house and their barn so they could do the chores in the blizzard and they wouldn't die. Like, that's crazy farming. But they would actually tether that, put her in the, okay, it's wintertime, time to put the rope up so they could follow the ropes. So I'm saying is that in the middle of the blizzard, which is the middle of complex grief, whether you're serving others or it's your own, to know that you can get to the barn, which is the grief event, in the middle of the blizzard, serve others, which in this case would be like milk the cow and feed the chickens and make sure everyone's okay, and then get back into the house. Having that rope is metaphorically profound. The only way you get it is by establishing this as your core belief, that there's a way for you to put like an anchor, just like a rock climber puts an anchor into a crack into the granite. And then you clip on your carabiner, and you clip it on and double check. And then you go through like that's when I say that I stand sort of with my shoulders back, standing like on guard in the middle of a fatality in the first couple of weeks. I'm standing with a harness on, and that harness then gives me the ability to cry, gives me the ability to embrace. Gives me the ability to swear when they swear. That's what I need to do. It gives me the ability to, it's a dreadful thing to walk into the front porch of a family that's just lost a 22-year-old kid. That is just a dreadful thing. Like, nobody wants to do that. And then I will sometimes have to go with like a senior leader because they're terrified of that. They're comfortable. Their homeostasis is spreadsheets. And talking to the board of directors, their homeostasis is not walking into the mobile home in the logging camp and sitting with a family. And so we have the ability, if we're anchored, we can take others with us, because they will just pick up that vibe that you're safe. This is going to be a safe entry, but it's a profound entry. We're not just staying on the surface. We're going in. I'm going to let the rope way out so that I'm way out here. I'll typically, even like sitting, I'll sit on the floor versus a chair if there's lots of people, especially if there's kids. Like, there's lots of like sort of ways to position your body to say that it's okay to be human. Okay, so a way for a leader also to prepare is to set this as your cultural value on your team. When we're in trouble, we clip into the anchor. When it's busy season, when it's slow, we're irritating each other, we anchor. And so that's that self-regulation, that's self-awareness and situational awareness. And we watch out for others that are getting what we would call unhinged or getting lost in chronic, in chronic grief or redlining delayed grief. So we get to start watching for those. I think we have something that we can do before grief hits us that will really prepare us for healthy grief versus unhealthy, or functional grief versus unfunctional. So hear me clear, grief is non-negotiable. There isn't a green tea that'll make it go away. There isn't an exercise regime or holiday or money or fame or distraction that makes it go away. It is because, from the neuroscience point of view, our entire system of mental health is based on what I call homeostasis. And grief is the disruption of homeostasis. So for yourself to get anchored, for you to build a culture that is anchored, and even an agency that is anchored. And I think that's the work that Dave, you're doing with your team, is you're saying, how in the world can we somehow get some tools into the people's hearts and minds so that collectively we anchor ourselves a bit better here. We're just going to keep going here. when I was preparing, I was just hanging around my office and I saw this and it caught my eye. So this was sitting on my shelf. I'm just going to show you. Can you see that? Maybe it's backwards even. No, it should be right way. So I did a bunch of consulting in South Korea on the tension of the North-South Korea dilemma in the DMZ. At one point, I was at a youth conference as one of their speakers. And there's like about 400 people in the room, and they all represented about 200 people in the university campuses. And it was strange because it felt like you could have said charge, and they would have texted all their friends, and they would have flooded the DMZ, crossed the border. 150 of them would have died, and you would have a unified Korea today. It had that kind of electricity in the air. I didn't say charged. I didn't think it was my job, but it was really, really interesting. So there are families that are separated by the DMZ. So extended families, because it was it was just at the end of the Korean War. So they whoosh went across, and that was that. Same thing with like the Iron Curtain back in the day. There are situations that are collective grief. And I think that's something that is good for us to just contemplate just for a minute. We were just in Saskatchewan, and my wife's mom, she's turned 90, so all of us that could make it, we made it, and we had a big birthday party for her. And she works at a secondhand store, like volunteers, and at the food bank. She's fully employed at 90, amazing woman. But she goes, "Oh, Steve, I found a book that you might like. It's about our ethnic group, Mennonites. Someone self-published, right? Mennonites that joined the White Army during the Bolshevik Revolution and actually made their way out of Europe through Istanbul. It's their stories." I went, "Oh, that sounds really great. Yeah." She said, "I think your dad would really like it." I go, "Hey, my dad would really love that." So I said, "Well, maybe I'll read it before I give it to my dad." I've only made it through a third, and I'm completely traumatized, like 100% traumatized. It's like Henry Schmidt talking about when I was 18 years old, this happened. And then the next guy, the same story. And they're talking about the collective grief of a civilization that went to ruin. First a war, and then a revolution, and then bandits, and then Stalin. And it's horrible. So my summer reading has been horrific. I read it like through one corner of my eye. I can't even read it. I have to fully anchor in before I read this. But my level of empathy towards my people has exponentially grown this summer. My uncles that couldn't embrace change, wow, surprise, surprise. They'd gone through a bit of change. And so I think as a leader, if we, just one of my hobbies. I mean, one of my hobbies is theology, and another hobby is like anthropology, like studying that. The other is it's this new group of people that I would call civilizationalists, people that talk about the rise and fall of civilizations. I think as leaders and peer support people, if we are willing to even just look through one squinty eye at the rise and fall of civilizations around us, it creates a perspective that is profound. And it helps us understand that while people go through individual grief, families go through grief cycles collectively, communities will when there's a fatality, we as civilizations go through collective grief. And not everybody is a survivor. Not everybody is connected to healthy grief. If I think about the relatives that they're all passed away now, but the ones that lived through the horrors of that Eastern Ukraine experience, the ones that cried were healthier than the ones that were angry. And then I look at the lineage of their families, because now they all have a couple dozen descendants at least, if not. I mean, we're talking Mennonites, so they're big breeders. So the ones that cried, the ones that told the stories, the ones that forgave, were able to process civilizational grief better than the others because they had a beautiful world in eastern Ukraine. It was amazing. And it was all gone. They called it their own paradise. Catherine the Great invited them in, and they spent a couple hundred years building up this society that was amazing. And it was all gone. I think as leaders, especially if we have this opportunity to be geographically moving around a little bit, to try to figure out the story that's going on. I know there's a couple of forests that we're speaking with right now that they've gone through collective grief, just with the challenges with just like it's always complex. It's not always just a fatality. It's sometimes challenges to even their timber program. And what about Marysville, this little town that burnt up in 2009? Remember those of you that follow forest things, it's called Black Saturday. 173 fatalities in one day. The fire changed the front. The fire was burning in like north of Melbourne, and all of a sudden it was like 53 kilometers long, and then the wind changed. The front was 53 kilometers, like 30 miles long, and it took out Marysville. I think so Marysville has this. You can't drive through Marysville without realizing that little village has a collective X, and they're going to either be processing it or not. If you want, Switchback has a podcast with one episode on our website, but the episode is amazing because it's with the dispatch leader for Black Saturday. And she and I, we just chat, and she talks through how she processed grief and how she watched a lot of her colleagues not process grief. And the cool thing is we caught it like a decade and more after the event. So there's a chance for her to do almost like a longitudinal reflection going, this is what I did. One of the pro tips that she did, which is on the podcast, she said after about 3 days, like the event happened, and then she was still in her house and going to work. 3 days, her body and her brain at a neuroscience point of view said, you've got to get out of here. You will not survive if you stay. If you wake up every morning and you smell that smoke, you will not survive. You'll have a mental breakdown. So she bought a plane ticket and she flew to Perth, where her daughter lives. And she hung out with her daughter for I think it was 5 days. And that was her reset that was a grief process. But it wasn't a distraction. It was a survival move. When she came back again, she was then able to start the trudge down the bell curve. So when people feel like they need to get out of Dodge in the heat of the moment, that's not always a bad thing. I see we have about 12 minutes left, and I want to talk still a bit more about sort of a leader's role in all this. Because I don't think we give ourselves enough credit as to in these moments how much influence we actually potentially have and how the influence can actually essentially save a life. So number one, as a leader or as a peer supporter, we're probably going to be invited into grief in the workplace. That's not ours. The event isn't ours. We don't own the event. It's like my son-in-laws that are like emerge doctors, and our daughter is a nurse. They get trained and said, we didn't cause the pain. It's not our fault. Like we're here to help, but we didn't cause the car accident. We didn't shoot anybody. We didn't have the asthma attack. Because there's often a projection like, why aren't you helping more? Or why aren't you doing your thing, right? So as leaders, I think for starters is that we have a role to play, and it's a big role, but it's not a loud role. It's more like being present. You don't have to have the right words to say. sometimes it's good to, like, when you're walking up to somebody and it's fresh, like you can say, do this, just, what that means? Like, would you like to hug it out? And just about everybody is huggy in that first, like, 72 hours to a week. And that's just the ritual. They just get used to hugging. If they're not a huggy person normally, in the middle of grief, they are. And so it sounds a bit metaphysical here for a second here, but when you hug as a leader, it's like plumbing. The empathy is flowing from you to them rather than the grief flowing from them to you. You let just a little bit flow into you so that you can have a real honest experience. But then when you hug them, you hug them, some big Montana man, you hug that man, and you don't rub their back, you stay still, and you don't break the pressure, you just stay. It's like, think of it like a battery charger. You are charging life into them, and you just charge that life into them. And my rule of thumb is I never break the hug. I let them break it. They take the lead. And you'll be surprised how long some people hold on. And sometimes you'll end up with a snotty shoulder, and that's okay. And that right there gets me off of the red line. So I need help to engage in the process of grief. And I find that physical contact is a very good way to make that engagement. Now, of course, if it's a handshaking culture, let's say some Asian countries, hugging is total taboo, so you just sort that out. But if it's culturally appropriate, find the way to make that profound connection. This is also, remember when I said grief is like an X that disrupts the homeostasis, whether you're in hypervigilance or whether you're anchored, regardless, it breaks the homeostasis. There is a window of opportunity as a peer supporter or as a leader to reset mindsets and cultures in the middle of grief. There is a way for bridges to be mended. So I'll give you an example. Like my little ethnic background, we're actually horrible at processing difficult conversations. That's our shtick. It's kind of a Germanic background, and so there's all these little micro rifts within my extended family. It's just how it is. Who's talking to who's not talking to who, and we find it easiest just not to talk. That's our mode of operation. A disruptor like the big X of grief has the opportunity to reset my extended family, where we start talking again, where we love each other, where we forgive each other, where we choose to be a team and support each other like we used to. So the same thing in the workplace. The workplace can get pretty cranky and pretty toxic and pretty like he said, she said, and how did you respond to COVID, and how did this, and blah, 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 and what side of the fence are you on here, and in the States, I mean, you have this lovely election coming up that makes it always so pleasant in the workplace, to talk about things. There's a moment of grief crashing and busting up the pattern of who you avoid, who you don't avoid, who you are comfortable, who you think is a safe person to talk to, who shares your point of view, who doesn't share your point of view. All that homeostasis is set up in the culture of your workplace. When that homeostasis gets broken as a leader, you have an opportunity to be a profound inspirational leader that's appropriate and call people back to team. So I'd like to end on this. Grief is an amazing opportunity for leaders to call people back into team, call them back into the red circle. You can do it within a family. You can do it within your community. Leaders can call people back in the workplace, back into team, and that'll save a life. And if you're looking at minimizing like collateral damage or an incident with an incident, that is the way to do it. You call people back into team. You without using maybe the terminology, but you say it's time for us to bear the axe. It's time for us to forgive each other. It's time for us to turn a new leaf, whatever turns you want. And the neat thing is the neuroscientists that study grief say, yes, this is your window of opportunity. Like if there ever was a window, it's right now, because homeostasis has been busted, and you're going to try to create a new space-time connection with the people that are around with you. It's like this window of opportunity. So grief, it sucks. It's complicated. It's unavoidable. But there's a healthy way for us to point ourselves and others towards processing grief. If you yourself have been caught in either delayed grief or complicated grief that's become chronic, you know, we just use we use this. So let's say this is you. You're lost up in this cave, and you're in some sort of a delayed dark night of the soul, and you're just not getting out. So here we are. We got this little webinar. We got Dave and Steve, sponsoring this. I'm just going to keep drawing circles around here. Our theory around how to help yourself get out of that cave is to keep adding team to this flywheel. And you never know who's going to be. It could be some random person that you strike up a conversation with, in the middle of a fire assignment or in the middle of a meeting on Teams. And then you take it off-site and you just talk to each other. You just keep adding layers of support, typically team, or even a podcast, but you keep adding layers of support until you can tell from a neurological point of view that, wow, I have left the cave. I'm starting my pathway back down into team. So that's the thing. The other thing is you can today make a decision just to anchor yourself, like go to the climbing store. Actually, you could actually do that for real. It'd be expensive, but go to the climbing store and buy say, okay, I need an anchor that goes into like granite to really hold like good 500 pounds. Say, okay, here's an anchor. I need a carabiner. Great. I need a chunk of rope. You got any secondhand harness I can get? And you just buy the physical equipment, hang it in your office, and it's right in view of your computer, and say, I don't know if I'll ever get out of this dark hole of this cave, of this grief that I have not resolved, but I know my brain can establish a new anchor point, a new point of reference, a new true north, and this could save my life. And so work on moving your grief through the process, but then also work on establishing an anchor. We've got just a minute or so just to chat it up if anybody would like to chat. Dave and I and Dino will stay online for a few minutes after 10:30. So if anyone does want to chat, of course, Dave's available. You have his contact information. You have mine because we've been blitzing you with emails. And so you can feel free to reach out. We're always happy to come on site and help you as well, right? Because it's part of the process of Switchback does. We try to help organizations reestablish a really healthy anchor for their culture. And then, of course, it plays out in safety and leadership and culture and communication. I'm going to take a sip of water.
I have a question, Stephen. So my question is, and I know that this focus is on kind of a team, and I get that. And I also understand that in the Forest Service, when someone dies, for example, fighting a fire, or, maybe in timber management, if a tree falls and hits somebody or something like that, then, you have a whole team kind of in grief for that team member. It's a little bit different when you have, for example, say, I'm just going to throw out an example. So you have an office team of administrative people, and one person on that team has maybe a death in their family didn't happen at work. It happened, maybe at home, something happened. And then, they're obviously going to take some annual leave and sick time to kind of deal with that grief, but then they come back to work, and then the rest of the team is kind of feeling a little awkward, like, what is their part now? What do they do? Because it's not someone that was close to them. It was someone that was close to a team member. And I'm just wondering, like, if you could give maybe some advice on supporting a member where something happens outside of work that's not related to the team.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The base answer is normalization of the process. So like me eating food in the person's family of the logging accident. So to normalize it, but not to force people to process something private and family in a public setting, but somehow to create it normalized. So if you're the leader, you say, hey, how are you doing? Great. So you're back. Is there any chance that you could give me just a few details about how things are going? And then, or would you be willing to talk about some of those details with your team? I can support you, just so that we can sort of normalize it and just know where you are, where you're at. Like, and so that kind of like safe language, but not saying we're not going to talk about it, or okay, now open your soul and give us all your guts. It's neither of those. It's something in the middle of saying we're available, we're here, but we need a little bit of intel in order to support you. So we call those tickets. And then I think it's a bit nuanced with grief that's not related to the workplace, but it's related to their private lives. Some people are very private, and you'll probably go more towards the neuroscience coaching of, like, are you sleeping, and how's your food and exercise and nutrition? Whereas some people will be a bit more Kubler Rossy, right? Where they'll say, oh, I really want to talk about the nuances of grief and how my mom's doing now that my dad's passed away, and oh, our family's crazy and this is going on, and now we've got this inheritance that we're all fighting over. Like, they want to talk more about the stages of the process of grief. So I think each person is like an individual, but I think if you look at sort of like the offerings in the world of grief, you can go sort of a science model for people that are more private, and then you can go more of an emotional resilience model for people that way, or you can go old school with Kubler Ross and and just like, talk about the stages. So that would be my suggestion. Hey, thank you. I'm going to formally end because I just respect your time. So it's 10:32. Thank you very much for coming on. On purpose, we chose not to do a breakouts because this is one of those ones where, like, talking to strangers is not always the appropriate thing to do. So thank you very much for coming. We'd love to stay connected if any way that you see that's possible and healthy. Thank you, Dave, for sponsoring this. Thank you, Forest Service. You guys are troopers. We love you so much. And if you do want to connect with us, I mean, our best work that we do is when we actually get in a plane and travel to your location, and we work for 3 days with your team. Those are just some of the best days, both in our lives and in your lives. So thank you very much.